everybody, my name is Phil, you are listening to RopeBreak, and we have a very special guest in the studio. We have the one and only Mr. Wayne Madden of Spanish Announce Table. One of the things that I brought you in for, we're doing like a massive day of like collaboration shit,
indeed.
Which is it's all fun and games.
Yes.
Because it's obviously we've never worked together before. But
No.
we work alongside each other and
That's
and
true.
being quite
Yeah.
a lot. So we ended up either interviewing the same people or we're in the same place at the same time. So we thought, fuck it, we'll just put some shit together, right? Yeah, why not? It'll be fun. I am not joined by Johnny because Johnny's busy doing his radio show.
Okay.
So Johnny's going to be on 2 radio stations on the same day.
That's fairly impressive, actually.
He's the Ric Flair of community radio.
That's quite cool.
Jet setting and all that. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is some things that a lot of people might not know, or they may not know, is how you actually started Spanish Announce Table.
Right, so going back about 6-7 months ago, it's not a massively long story, actually. It's not a massively long history, which is surprising considering everything we've achieved since then. But going back about 6-7 months ago, I was approached by Nova Radio Northeast, who I do the show with, and they had asked me about the idea of coming in and doing a weekly radio show. To give a bit of context, before I had the job I do now, where I work full-time Monday to Friday, majorly 9 till 5 mostly, and obviously I'm off for 2 weeks, which is what allows me to partly come in and record with your good self. But because I was off work, and because I changed jobs to a more fixed 9 till 5 contract, the manager of Nova Radio came up to me, Dean, and he says to me, Dean and Neil, who run the station together, and they were like, we're very eager to get you to come back on. Now, I've been working with those guys 3-4 years. They used to be known as Gravity Radio. I've been working with them since back then. And they said, we'd really like you to come on and do a show. I would love to have done a show, except that my previous contract had me working shift work. So sometimes I was in at night, sometimes I was in early in the morning. I could never say, listen, the only, I'm always going to be free on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night or whatever. So, got the new contract for the job and was quite happy that I could commit to a set time every evening. And then as it happened, they were doing a wrestling show on Nova Radio Northeast, and it was presented by a guy I'd known a few years. His name is Paul, and he is also a Newcastle musician known as Pablo Mellons.
Oh, yeah,
He does the show Turn Chuckle. Well, the precursor to Turn Chuckle or Pablo's Poppin' Podcast, it goes by many titles, but the precursor to Paul's show was that he'd do a weekly thing for a few months on Nova. Now, he felt because of the Skype interviews and the kind of guests that, he has access to Bruce Pritchard, Jim Cornette, Savio Vega. He's had a lot of people on. And he kind of said to me, I'm doing Skype interviews at 3 a.m. with these guys. It doesn't work well for a fixed time every week. So Nova came to me and said, we'd like you to do a show. We know you're interested in wrestling, and funny enough, we're wondering if you could kind of take this slot, which was a wrestling show previously. So Nova are very much into continuity. They love that. And so, much like I'm sure your station are, but they basically said to us, would you like to come in and do a wrestling show? And so I thought about it for about 2 seconds and went, yeah, I'll do that.
2 seconds.
Yeah. With a gentleman called Mark Fox, who runs a website, The Grapple Arcade, and he's obviously been instrumental in the show since then. And then I've also, we had Paul on, and Paul was just there by coincidence, and he was like, I'm not really there officially, I'm more just because Paul... I don't know if you what you know about Paul, but his room, he lives in Gateshead, and he has a room in his house that's dedicated to WWF merchandise. He's been collecting since he's about 8 years old, and he's got thousands of pieces of merchandise, and it's quite spectacular, but the Instagram stuff speaks for itself in terms of the photos. Anyway, did a pilot with those two. We talked a little bit about retro wrestling video games, events. We talked a little bit about different bits and pieces. And that seemed to go down really well. And so a few weeks later, the idea of actually coming and doing the show Grapple Arcade started. And at that point, and I suppose this is a longer story than I thought it was going to be, so apologies.
It's all right.
At that point, there was a gentleman named Chris Welch, who I used to be a wrestler about 10, 15 years ago, did a lot of indie stuff and did a lot of hardcore wrestling. And Chris and I had worked together in another company. We did the National Citizenship Service together for a couple of charities, and we worked with a charity together, and we'd met, and obviously as we were working together on that, we'd bonded and did a bit of small talk. Oh, hey, we're into wrestling. So I was always looking for a project to work on with Chris. And then I'd known Neil McGeever, who I work with for about 8 years. We'd worked together on a BBC project about 8 years ago, and we were always looking for something to do together again. And really, for me, Spanish Announce Table has been about getting 4 or 5 people, because that's where James came from, James Chilvers, and it was about getting 4 or 5 people together in the one room who I really wanted to spend time with and work with, but of course, owing to the complexity of modern life, it would be very difficult if we weren't doing a project together.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it happened, and we got all these people to come together, and then I kind of realised, wow, we have quite a team.
You've got quite a bit of chemistry going on as well.
Yeah,
That's
well,
one of the things I noticed.
I think it helps. I think we've been very lucky in that regard, because even though we've been on the air only about 6 or 7 months, roughly, probably about 5 or 6, unfortunately, that's unfortunate, but the fortunate thing for us is that we've had a lot of background experience. So as I say, I've known Neil about 8 years. I've known Chris about 4 or 5 years. I've worked with James for at least the last year and a half. We were on the last contract I did together in work. He's now in another job, but he wanted to keep doing the wrestling show, so that's great. And I've known Mark probably the least amount of time, but to be, again, to his credit, Mark runs his company, the Grapple Arcade, and Mark explained his company to me when we first met by saying, it is a retro video game company where I host retro video game nights at venues around Newcastle.
Yeah.
And I just went, that's the greatest idea I've ever heard, and started weeping. And then he suddenly realized this guy might like what I do. So yeah.
Well, so it seems to me that it's a version of like happenstance, a little bit of luck here and there,
definitely.
And a lot of people with a lot of passion.
Oh, definitely. I would say that word happenstance probably hits the nail on the head. I think that I look back at it and go, I'm amazed. I mean, I did a show a few weeks ago, and obviously, I'll sit in the presenter's chair, if you like, and work the desk, and I have these guys around me in a semicircle, and we have a couple of the guests, and we have the presenters, the co-presenters, and I'm kind of thinking, this is mad that all these different people that I know from totally different areas of my life are now all in this studio. And I've now introduced them to each other, and they've now become good friends with each other. And so, like Neil said to me the other day, he says, I've met Chris before. He says, I came over to see you when you guys, we were in Sunderland Uni, because the charity we were working with, we were renting some of the rooms over in Douglas Court. Just across the river. And so we were doing that at the time, and Neil was living in Sunderland, and it came by one day, and one of these fleetingly, oh, hi, this is my friend Neil, oh, this is Chris. And Neil had sort of said to me, I met Chris like 4 years ago, and never thought that 4 years later we'd be all working together on a radio show. It's mad. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things that it's your radio show, it's very different to what we do. I will say that. That's one of the things that I do like, is the fact of we can still live in the same space.
Yes.
But we do different things.
Yes.
Like we do things you guys don't. You do things that we don't. Like you guys are more. You prefer to talk more in depth about certain things.
Sure.
We just like to fuck about. I've never laughed that much in quite a while. We just literally just talking shit. So that's one of the things.
Laughter is good, man.
That's one of the things that we love doing. But you like get to like certain parts of stories and just like, well, why did this happen? Where did this go? You've got like forks in the road. You get more in depth into stuff.
Do you know? I think I blame that on my background. I am a journalist by nature, and I studied journalism from a very young age. I was about 14 when I did my first radio show back in Dublin, and I did some work experience in high school, secondary school, and I did at a radio station. I was about 14. And they taught me at the time not only how to present a show, but also write an article for news, which I would go on and read on the news. And I'd be like, today a ship crashed into Dublin Port or something like that. Yeah. And they taught me how to write script for radio. And so from then, my love of journalism descended into this ridiculous nature of wanting to do almost a documentary series. So I totally appreciate the fact that you've said, well, we look to go in depth on stuff, because that's kind of, my mind is always about finding out. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, that one of the things that I enjoyed most is, you're obviously aware of the phenomenal mag Calling Shots.
Yes, I am, yeah.
They had approached me in the last couple of weeks, and they asked me to write an article for their 30th issue. Mm-hmm. And I did so, and I look forward to it. I believe it's coming out very, very soon. Mm-hmm. But there's going to be an article written by myself all about the light heavyweight championship.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's a history of the title that many people forgot has even existed, I think. But it's kind of an expose, a feature piece. And I wrote it, and I thought, this is 1900 words. This is totally over the top. And then I did it again, and it was 2300 words, and I put more stuff in, and I thought, they're going to kill me. And the editor, Neil, in total respect to him, came back to me and said, every writer has a different style. I absolutely love what you're doing here because it's what you love. It shows passion. I'm going to leave it untouched. Mm-hmm. So I was so happy to hear that, because I've written for other people before, and as much as I love getting published, sometimes I get letters back from editors going, this is great, but I've basically edited your interview that it's only 70% of what you gave us.
Yeah.
And I kind of go, that's okay. I mean, it's good to have my name out there, but it's a shame that the whole thing wasn't out there. This is a rare thing, so I love Calling Shots for doing that. Yeah. So thank you, Neil, for doing that.
Good on Calling Shots for doing that.
Yeah.
Crack on. Brilliant.
Yes.
It's see, again, that you can do those sorts of things that I can't. I'm not a journalist. I'll quite happily admit that I suck at writing.
Okay.
That's one of the things you can always tell about this show. It's never scripted. It's just whatever gets into my brain comes straight out of my mouth, and unfortunately, it's usually things that get me in trouble, which I'll try and not do on your radio show. But it's one of those things. So we've talked a lot about Spanish Announce Table, where you started.
Yeah.
Where's your love for wrestling then? Where does that start?
The most honest answer to that question is that my earliest memory of wrestling is my brother, who was 3 years younger than me. He had some friends who lived around the corner. They were twins named Sean and Brian. And Sean and Brian, they loved playing with wrestling figures. And that is some of my earliest memories, because they would have played with wrestling figures out in the front yard, and they were huge fans of it. And then through that, I was about 6 or 7 years old. And my dad took me over to see, because my dad has family in Manchester. So when I say he took me over, I was in Dublin growing up, and he took me over to see my grandmother and some of his family in Manchester. And they'd moved over there in the 70s or whatnot, but just for the purposes of exposition. So anyway, they're there. And as part of that trip, I went to a Toys R Us, which didn't exist. Well, they never existed in Ireland in the end, sadly, but they did. Nothing like that existed. We didn't have Smiths or anything like that at the time. This massive toy megastore. And I can remember genuinely going into Toys R Us at about 6.5, 7, looking through the WCW wrestling figures for a Sting Galoob figure.
Right.
And I purchased that figure, and I had him for years, and it was him. And I'm fairly confident that on the same trip, although I probably got him a little bit after, I don't know 100% where. I may have got him the Christmas after, I don't know. But I also had a Jake Roberts Hasbro figure. And the two of those guys, Sting would face Jake Roberts on a weekly basis.
Right.
And so as I got older, as well as having the figures and all that, I definitely started getting into the TV show. But I think that my main era for the TV show was around about, so this is going to sound weird, when I was old enough to finally be let stay up and watch the pay-per-view and not have to, and it's like, well, Wayne, you have school in the morning, but Dad, I want to watch this pay-per-view. And when I was finally old enough, my first pay-per-view, this is going to sound so somber, the first pay-per-view I ever saw live was Over the Edge 1999.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Try to convince me that that was not fake. And I swear to God, at 14, I was convinced that there is no way that's real. That's totally... That wrestling's just play acting. There's no way that's real.
Yeah.
So from that point on, I kind of got hooked on a lot of wrestling. And when I was, the year after, when I was 15, in the summer, my parents, the first kind of big vacation we ever went on, we went to New York for 4 days and then flew up to Toronto in Canada. And the 4 days we spent in New York City, on the very first night, my dad was like, "You're in New York, son. Where do you want to go?" And I went, "I want to go to WWF New York."
Yeah, of course you do.
And I went to WWF New York, and I was there at 15 years of age, and there's a video footage somewhere. They have a handheld camera of me eating a burger at WWF New York, and Triple H's music starts up, and when you went into WWF New York, it was kind of weird. They had a lot of the strobe lighting effects, and there was a big Titantron in the background for where they showed the events. And what would happen is they'd just play wrestling theme tunes, or they'd play songs from like Volume 4 or Forcible Entry or stuff like that, and they'd play random songs. So yeah, so I kind of got into wrestling around then. So between 99 and 2002 roughly, I hold the Royal Rumble 2002 in very high regard because Mr. Perfect came back, and for me that was a huge deal at the time. So until around mid 2002, I was a major fan. I was a big Jerichoholic. I was totally into China, and the Radicals, they were my heroes, you know, and in many respects, and I loved a lot of the different wrestlers. But at some stage around 2002, which I think happens a lot of people my age, I started just falling out of interest with wrestling. I started looking towards other things, whether it be music or other forms of media or whatever it was I was into, and I kind of gravitated away from it. And around 2012, I started coming back. And a lot of the reason that I started coming back...
Hold on, is it John Cena or Randy Orton?
I think John Cena caught my attention because suddenly I always considered that John Cena did what Hogan did in terms of marketing and in terms of being able to get people noticed.
Say your prayers, take your vitamins.
Yes, I would always dip in and out of wrestling. I would always be interested in certain performers. I would try and watch the Rumble every year, even in between. So even if I did like no wrestling watching in 2005, I'd still want to sit down and watch the Rumble because I was very nostalgic about stuff like that. And I would still watch some old matches, or I would have the odd pay-per-view here and there that I'd watch. But so I got back in love with it, and then there were a load of different things, and then at some point as well, in the early days, I'm not sure what exactly we can mention, but I'll try it anyway, and sure, feel free to edit it out or just bleep it out.
Dude, just talk about whatever the
fuck fair enough.
I don't care.
So, fair enough. Lawyers on the standby. So when I was studying briefly at Sunderland Uni in 2013 in this fine institution, one of our lecturers was kind of hijacked in a sense by a gentleman named Simon from What Culture.
Oh, okay.
And at the time, What Culture was very much a new website, relatively speaking, and they had yet to become the formidable wrestling website that they were to become in later years.
And hating on Tama Tonga and whatnot.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. But Simon basically gave this big lecture one day, and he went, "Anybody who wants to write about any kind of pop culture stuff, please feel free." And I totally was into writing about pop culture. Wrestling never really crossed my mind, but I contributed a few times to What Culture, and that kind of brought wrestling back a little because I'd go to the website and I'd read the wrestling articles, and I'd start getting back into it. 2014, I worked for a radio station where I won a competition. No, I didn't win, but we did a competition where we brought some privileged young people to see a wrestling show. We got about 10 of them, and they needed a couple of minders to go with the kids, and I went, yeah, it'll be good fun. It's on in the Metro Arena. So I went to see a random SmackDown show in 2014, and that, at that point, I was starting to get back in. I was like, oh, it's Lillian Garcia. I remember her, and Mark Henry was there, and I think... I want to say, no, it wasn't. That wasn't the main event. I did go to one where the main event was the New Age Outlaws teaming with Sheamus in Newcastle.
Okay.
That was pretty damn cool, because when I was back in 2001, I'd gone to see a World Wrestling All-Stars show.
Okay.
And the main event of that was Jeff Jarrett taking on the Road Dogg.
Okay.
So that was quite a while ago, but of course, gap between appearances on Raw.
Yeah, there was something on the social media of it was, who was it previously? It was someone else, and it was what's his name? Dutch Mantel.
Oh right,
that's who it was previously. It was 12 years between appearances, and Jeff Jarrett broke that with 16.
Because they did a thing. They did a thing at one point, like years ago, as a joke that I remember, where they said we were going to have a rematch from WrestleMania 1, and it was Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik against Barry Windham, against against the Flying USA team or something. And the match never happened because, for one thing, Iron Sheik couldn't take a fall out of the ring.
Yeah.
And Kurt Angle came out and interrupted the match before it could even start. But it was a bit kind of I like the nostalgia. I like the nostalgia.
Man. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yes.
I'm interested to get your opinions on a couple of things as well.
Sure.
While we're here, might as well.
We might as well.
Use you for some fucking content.
I'll do my best.
But one of the things I do want to talk to you about, obviously we've talked a lot about WWE, WWF, your origins, Spanish announce table.
Sure.
British wrestling.
Yes.
It's one of the things that we love. RopeBreak,
absolutely.
And that we're big on it. We love pushing it forward. And I would love to hear your opinions about where British wrestling is now compared to when you possibly first went to your first local show.
Well, I think it's come on. First of all, I think it's come on leaps and bounds for a start. I think that bit is obvious. I attended some shows in Sunderland and Newcastle about 10 years ago when I first moved to this city, and if I remember correctly, there was a pub in North Shields that was doing shows, and there was a show as well in Sunderland, and I think D'Lo Brown and Gangrel were on the bill, and they were the kind of two mainstays in England at the time, in the sense that they were former WWF wrestlers or WWE wrestlers, and all of this British undercard talent was built around this American performance.
Bringing the imports.
Yes. So I do remember those shows, and as fun and as rough and ready as they were, I am kind of a hell of a lot more delighted to step into an event like North or Full Tilt Wrestling or Tidal or Main Event Wrestling or Upbrawl, and the fact that I can list so many of them within a small radius is in itself astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Northeast is kind of an undiscovered talent for professional wrestling in the UK now.
Yeah,
we have so many promotions.
Totally.
I think the last count I had, it was 15.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
I think it's something like that. It's something like 15 promotions all within the Northeast, so that's within like a 30 to 45 mile radius of each other.
It is incredible, and there's a lot of a lot of wrestlers who've spoken to myself in the last couple of weeks have said to me they are getting a phenomenal amount of bookings from the Northeast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of these guys, they're travelling up from Sheffield or Cardiff or Leeds or wherever, and obviously Leeds isn't that far, but they're travelling up from Sheffield or Cardiff or London, and they're getting a ridiculous amount of bookings, and maybe every weekend they're in the Northeast at Newcastle show.
It's a rare occasion that we don't have a wrestling show on a weekend here.
Yeah, it's incredible. As somebody said to me a few weeks ago, and I think I mentioned this to you before when we first met, but someone had said to me that there was a weekend going back in November where there were 4 different shows in Newcastle within the city limits happening on the same night.
Yeah,
And
that
some
sounds
of
right,
the
yeah.
wrestlers were going from one show to another, depending where they were on the card.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a guy who used to do that a lot is El Ligero.
Right.
El Ligero used to have to do that a lot of times. I do know that. I think the best one I've heard is I think he had to do 6 different shows over 2 days.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, it was a Saturday and a Sunday.
Yes.
And he had to do 3 different shows. He had to get booked on different areas of the card.
Yes.
Because just purely for travel.
Oh yeah.
And he would get his shit ready. So I think he would still have his mask on most of the time when
Oh
he was
yeah.
driving.
Yeah. That's it.
And just go, and then right, I've got to go. I can't sign anything. I've got to go. I've got
Yes.
another show. And it's a case where that's happening quite a lot now.
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
yeah.
if we just try and list some off the top of our heads. So obviously you've got North,
Yes.
Full Tilt,
Yes.
Northumbria Pro Wrestling Society,
That's right.
Empire,
Yes.
Almost Pro,
Yes.
Uproll.
Uh-huh.
Who else we got? Main Event Wrestling.
Main event.
Oh God.
Did we say Tidal? Because they're
Tidal,
they're
yeah.
doing a show in digital on
Title.
Sunday, I believe.
Yeah, I think we should count Rise.
Yes,
We
definitely.
should definitely
yeah.
count Rise.
Yeah.
God, how many? So that's 9 already.
Yes. Incredible.
But it's just Northern Championship Wrestling too.
Yes.
Is that a thing? You still?
I think so, yeah. I mean, there's obviously, and I mean, I know that they're not always based in the Northeast anymore, but of course Defiant.
Yeah, Define. Yeah, that's obviously
Who
a
are
big
themselves, doing quite a few shows. And I think,
one. Yeah. NGW.
there's quite a few. And I mean, when you consider just how much is going on. But actually, speaking of federations, I must mention this to you. We were talking about this. You'll love this.
Oh, great.
We were talking about this on a recent show. I didn't realize that HT Drake owns the ring.
Did you not know that?
And so that ring in itself could tell a story about where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a full documentary on
You
that.
could on the
I
ring.
would not want to do a UV light on it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he was either an engineer or he knew quite a few people who'd done it. And I think he paid to have it made, and had it made specifically.
Wow.
And I think that's why it's used at a load of different shows as well, because it's a really nice ring to bump in.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I believe that's true.
Do you know, I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. That
Yeah.
like I had in my naivety. I mean, I know Full Tilt obviously have their own ring because the academy are there. But in my naivety, I would have believed, these federations have a ring and they put some. And I was like, oh my God, it's like it's the one ring.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Full Tilt, because Full Tilt's ring was previously owned by a different company
Oh,
called CRW.
now there we go.
Complete Revolutionary Wrestling, I believe is what it was.
Okay.
They ran out of Newcastle, and people like Caden from Rise.
Yes,
he started there.
Oh right,
He started with
okay.
CRW. There was a few other people there. There was a couple of people that I still know that don't do wrestling anymore, but they were all part of it. But that's where that originally came from. And I remember people saying, it's a fucking horrible ring to bump in.
Yeah.
Apparently people would take superplexes off the top rope and like have to like roll out and not do the rest of the session because
Oh, wow,
the back was
okay.
fucked.
It's
But I don't know if it's probably better now. I hope so. But I imagine it is, because if Full Tilt Wrestling are still running with it. Then
Yes.
it's probably been fixed up.
well, this
But
is
yeah,
true.
from what I remember, that ring was the old CRW ring.
Oh wow, it's interesting actually, because I would honestly love to know how many rings the WWE owns. I mean, I presume now it's a few more. They've got NXT. I mean, I know 205 Live is taped before certain shows, but even aside from that, I would love to know how many rings they actually have. I'd say it's such a high price commodity item that you really have to be sparse about how much money you're spending.
See, I was speaking to Chris Lloyd of Pro Wrestling Zenith. There's
Yes.
another promotion for you that's starting up, by the way.
Okay.
Their first show is 22nd of February.
Amazing.
Gateshead, Wardley Club.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh, fantastic.
that's an old IWF place too. So I don't know if you know IWF.
I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Independent Wrestling Federation
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
old days. They used to run that quite a lot.
Wow.
So that's kind of a throwback for
Yes.
anyone that loves Northeast wrestling like
Oh,
me.
that's crazy.
It's so they're running that show. But yeah, what I was going to speak about is the way that obviously the rings. And speaking of Chris Lloyd of Pro Wrestling Zenith, he bought his ring second hand but he bought it for £1,100.
Okay.
And it was a bit. There was something wrong with it.
Okay.
And he looked at the receipt of who he sent it to, because he bought it on Amazon at eBay or something.
Yes.
And he looked at the receipt of who he sent it to, and it was Kevin Onions, and he was like, "Oh shit! Like, I've either just been scammed out of. Well, yeah, I put down a £400 deposit.
Yeah.
But he was like, either I've just been scammed out of the biggest fucking deal ever, or Kevin Onions is a real name, or it's a Kevin Owens tribute.
Yeah,
it's fucking stupid. But yeah, rings, obviously this is a thing. But yeah, rings have always been about. I think, to answer your question for WWE, I think in the UK they have 3.
Okay.
I'm not 100% on that, but there's always comes a time when because there's not many 20 by 20 rings.
Yes.
Is the problem. 5 Star had one. I don't know where 5 Stars is. Do you remember 5 Star wrestling?
I do remember 5 Star, yeah.
And that shit you. Yeah.
It's quite interesting, actually, because we had a guy on a few weeks ago who's written 2 books about 5 Star.
Oh yeah, is it a bit like the Nitro book?
Yes.
Where that Nitro book, yeah. Yeah, 5 Star's a weird one though.
It's a very weird one. What I liked about 5 Star, looking back on the history retrospectively, because I had to do a little bit of research when that interview came round, and what I loved about 5 Star was the only time that their World Heavyweight Championship title changed hands was in Newcastle. Which I thought was a bit weird in itself, but of course John Morrison was.
Well, I mean, if Johnny was here, he would be going crazy right now.
Oh yeah,
he hated that. They had Rey Mysterio versus AJ Styles, and they fucked it up.
Yeah,
how? That's physically impossible. I thought it was physically impossible to do. Apparently not. God damn it! It's just fucking it's so ridiculous.
It's an interesting one.
I liked when they came back and they started doing Facebook Live shows. I liked that.
Yes,
that made sense. But then I heard about people not getting paid. Yeah. I heard about people wanting cash in hand, so everybody else had to fucking wait. I was speaking of Ryan Rude.
Yes.
Who, Filthy Ryan Rude, for anyone who doesn't know. Go listen to the Pro Wrestling Zenith one. He's on there. He's a really interesting guy. He was doing stuff for those shows, and he had that problem.
Yeah.
Where the big stars would come in, want that stuff in cash, and then everybody else would have to wait a few days.
Yes.
Because nobody's going to have like 2 or 3 grand in cash.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So they've had to go grab everything, whatever they made.
It's quite fascinating, really. I mean, Greg Lambert was the guy that we spoke to, and he did a lot of the commentary work. And he said to us that he was quite honoured to do the only pay-per-view that the company had ever done retrospectively. He actually works press though now on World of Sport. He's just on the World of Sport tour.
Oh, the tour, yeah.
Which I have to be honest, as happy as I am to see the WWE finally bring Raw back in May, as happy as I am to see that happen to Newcastle, I was kind of surprised. I'd like to see World of Sport do a tour here. I'd be quite curious.
World of Sport would do really well.
I think they would,
because this was previously, for anyone who doesn't know, I know a bit of British wrestling history. World of Sport used to run all the time up here back in the 60s and 70s. They used to run the City Hall quite a lot. So they used to run all the time. Your Les Callets, your Mark Rollerball Roccos, people such as that, Johnny Saint as well. Used to come up here all the time, and they were a regular for the Northeast, because for Northeast it was working class. It was working class entertainment.
Oh, totally.
It was what you did on a Friday night. So I think there's still a lot of those people there that would definitely go, World of Sport, I remember that. Or I remember hearing about that from my grandparents or whatever. And they want to go. I definitely understand possibly why, because they've got other areas that they're more likely to hit, or they're probably just better arenas, better places to host.
Or would the hesitancy, and I mean no disrespect, but would the hesitancy be based on the fact that regardless of what night you pick to tour World of Sport, that month you're probably competing against 6 or 7 shows in Newcastle?
In the Northeast it is difficult. Like if you're running the same show as Defiant, you're going to lose. Up here is, and that says a lot.
It does.
It says a lot about how strong the area is.
Yeah, definitely.
Because if you realise that Defiant will have Pac on it, more than likely.
Yeah, true.
If they're doing a loaded taping, they'll more than likely have Pac on. So they also then realise that we just can't compete against that. But they've got a lot of local guys on there: Rampage Brown, Conor Renshaw, Benji, Martin Kirby's from Yorkshire. Like they've got so many local guys on there, but it's so big.
Yes.
And any time it does O2 Academy show, pretty much sells out. One of my actual favourite venue was the Northumbria Uni.
Yes.
Upstairs. That was one of my favourite venues.
Oh, wow.
Because it is quite close-knit, but when looking at the camera views and the camera angles, it looks huge.
Yes.
It looks massive. It looks as big or bigger than the O2 Academy. And I imagine it doesn't cost as much to run. But seeing those shows, those are excellent. And the sound travels a lot better. Yeah. That's one of the things I did notice. It carries a lot better there than it does the O2 Academy. Yes. The O2 Academy, with the high ceilings and the walls being so far away, it just feels empty almost.
Yes. Yeah.
The Northumbria University Institute, that venue, the sound travels better. Anything you hear, it sounds so much more.
I think a lot of that with Northumbria is probably because everything they do isn't necessarily geared towards traditional. I mean, you can definitely have great music gigs there, but it's more geared towards sports, amphitheater, and arena crowd. So definitely, I totally think you're right there that with Northumbria Uni, it's about just utilizing the space for sport as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's when they ran the big Northumbria Hall too for the WCPW World Cup, when it was still WCPW, and that even then that filled out really well.
It did.
I think that filled really well. And I'll be honest, I think they could run another show there if they wanted to. I'm a bit disappointed that they're not running a pay-per-view in Newcastle. I know they do loaded tapings here.
Sure.
But it's kind of, I'm hoping that if they do a massive pay-per-view event, that it'll be in Newcastle.
It would be nice to see. Yeah, it'd be nice. I think it's always good for, I know some of our lads a few weeks ago, just as private citizens, if you like, certainly not on the books, I won't claim that, but some of our lads went down to see NXT in Blackpool to see the takeover.
I saw that, yeah.
And they were delighted by it, but I think they said themselves afterwards that it would always be a great fun to have a show taped in Newcastle, because if you had so many people going, you'd all be looking for each other in the audience. And I think especially it's like if you go to a gig and you find out later that they've recorded it for a home recording, or they have an audio file of it, you feel a bit better, I think, about that gig as a fan, because you're almost like, I was there, I heard this, and it's like your little small piece of history, if you like. So yeah, definitely. I think I'd love to see. I'd love to see WWE do it, but I'd love to see what I'd really like to see WWE doing for the network. Although it would be a phenomenal undertaking, I'd love to see them start televising house shows.
Yeah.
They don't have to do every one, but just a handful of, let's do a random house show.
Like if they televised a couple of UK house shows.
Yeah.
Like for the European tour or something. Or even stuff like, ones that I would be interested in, like China.
Yes.
Like I would, for some reason, like, we're broadcasting a house show from China. I wonder what that would be like.
I'd love to see.
What would the crowd be like? Because I'm interested, because obviously a Japanese crowd are different than a European crowd, and an American crowd's different again. I'm wondering how a Chinese crowd.
Well, speaking of crowds, I thought that the Saudi Arabian crowd during Crown Jewel were pretty lackluster.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, probably nobody paid for their seats.
No.
Yeah,
that's true.
They all paid the WWE to come there. So
it's funny though, right? And I totally get your point, but we were doing some because I was very, very lucky around the time that this show started. Probably, arguably, the biggest biggest guest I've interviewed so far, is Eric Bischoff.
Yeah.
And I was extraordinarily lucky to get 6 minutes to sit down with this man. And he could have easily just told me to get lost, especially concerning that it was very difficult for him to even get to that point where he was sitting in front of me.
I was there at that show. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
So it was a difficult show. But when I was doing the research and I was thinking, what in God's name could I possibly ask Eric Bischoff? I looked at a lot of the Collision in Korea pay-per-view that they did in South Korea or North many years ago. And he basically, a lot of the audience were meant to have actually been mandated by the government to attend that show. But of course, you'd never really notice, because looking at the crowd in that audience, they're fairly well into it. Like they were kind of like really sort of receptive about it.
I mean, it is a case though of like, what are you meant to do? There's some sheiks are offering you a butt fuck amount of money.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do? Say no? Tell me any other company wouldn't say yes. Because they would as well. I can't blame them.
I had heard a rumour, right? You tell me if you'd heard the same thing or if you believe in this. But I'd heard a rumour for the Greatest Royal Rumble. Obviously the first Saudi event. And apparently Vince was to have had a meeting with the Sheik, and apparently been going through his advisors for many weeks, and finally he had a meeting with the Sheik himself. And so Vince came up to the Sheik and said, it's a great honor to meet you. And he says, you must be really into wrestling. And the Sheik was like, yes, I am. I'll tell you who my favorite wrestler of all time are, the Ultimate Warrior and Yokozuna. It would be great if both of these performers could appear at the event. And Vince was meant to have been like, yeah, we can certainly ask them. Would you give me a moment, please, your embassy? And so apparently that's why we had that random sumo wrestler.
Yeah, the guy who looks like Yokozuna.
Yeah.
Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah, I do remember hearing that, to be honest. I remember hearing that a lot of it was just to please the sheiks. Or the sheiks, however you want to say.
Shawn Michaels, would you like to come out of retirement? But I have my credibility to think about. We'll give you $8 million. Yeah.
Okay, my credibility is about worth that. Yeah, it's about that. Yeah, that in my hair. He should have came out as like Morn Shackles or something as well. He should have done something like that. That would have been even more funny.
Now introducing one half of the Rockers, S. Michaels. No, that's too obvious. Sean
Mickles.
M. No.
Mr. Mickles.
Totally.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's a good one. The thing is, we cover quite a lot of ground there. To be honest, we're covering quite a bit to be perfectly honest. So I'll get back on NXT UK.
Yes, please.
Because we were talking about that briefly.
Yeah, absolutely.
The NXT UK Performance Centre.
Yes.
Now, we've seen a few people from the Northeast now.
Yes.
Go down to the NXT UK and the Performance Centre itself. Now, let's take a potluck draw and look at the next 5 years for British professional wrestling.
Sure.
Does it go up? Does it go down?
I would be surprised if it didn't go up, but I would be honest, it would be hard to see it going up in a massive direction, only because, and we've had this problem before, if you just start pumping money into any business in this day and age, the bubble will simply burst.
Yeah.
So I think they have to be very careful at how they do it. I think the fans who love NXT very much love the fact that it's their show in their little venue.
Yeah.
It was kind of a thought that crossed my mind when I was at North this past weekend. I was standing in the Riverside and I was thinking, I wonder what would happen if someone who was a big fan of North won a lot of money and approached the Andrew Bowers, the head of North, and basically said, Andrew, what if I was to pay for you guys to fill the Utilita Arena one night?
Yeah.
And I kind of curious, because I know Progress in London struggled with that when they went to Wembley.
Well, I was there at that Wembley show.
Yeah.
And I will say, they cut off a bit of the arena for it, but it was 12,000.
Yes.
And it was sold out.
which is phenomenal. The interesting thing is that Triple H gave a statement, coming back to NXT UK, Triple H gave a statement a couple of months ago in which he said something like, a lot of people come up to me and they tell me that SummerSlam 92 was an amazing event. Well, let me tell you, SummerSlam 92 was great, but financially it didn't make sense. We didn't make money.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were a bit upset with him about that. And I kind of thought, I'm not really sure how it wasn't possible, because that was about 80,000 people.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like looking at like SummerSlam 92 on home video. I was like, I'd be surprised that you couldn't have made money at that time with a major pay-per-view. May not have been 80,000. I may have overshot that. But the point was, it was a hell of a lot of people. And I'm kind of like, I was thinking that seemed to be his justification, because Triple H had been asked how long until you do a major pay-per-view within the UK for the WWE. And Triple H was like, well, you know, SummerSlam 92, that was great. That was back in the day. We didn't have the money we have now, and but no, we couldn't do it.
Well, let me have.
Yeah.
I've just pulled up SummerSlam '92 here.
Go for it.
Let's try and
do it.
Let's have a look. So, the only reason I can think of where it didn't make money financially is hotels, getting flights over, and people not wanting to do it.
Sure.
So let's have a look at. We'll go match by match and see who, if anybody, wouldn't have wanted to do this, and I can see one
Okay.
already that I can think wouldn't do it.
Yes.
So your first match is Bushwhackers and Jim Duggan versus the Mountie and the Nasty Boys.
Oh yeah, nice
Nasty
match.
Boys. Jesus, the Nasty Boys. I haven't heard of that. They came over to the UK recently, I think.
Yes. I believe so, yeah.
Papa Shango and Tito Santana.
Ah, Papa Shango. I have a great love for Papa Shango.
Papa
I
Shango
do.
you can't
Yeah.
hate on. You
Yeah,
can't.
yeah.
I prefer the Godfather, though.
No.
But Legion of Doom against Money
nice.
Inc. with Jimmy Hart.
Wow.
Now, I can think that possibly Hawk might have had a problem with it.
Yeah.
Because of the obviously it's everybody said about how the demons he's had.
Yes.
But I think there's a couple of people on this card that might have had to been paid a lot more
yeah,
to
sure.
come over. Nails against Virgil.
Wow. Okay. That's slightly. I mean, you know, with all due respect to Virgil, that seems like slightly a bit of a filler match actually at a SummerSlam pay-per-view.
Nails Virgil, 3 minutes 55.
Oh well, there we go then. There we go.
Rick Martel versus Shawn Michaels.
All right.
Rick
okay.
the Buddy Martel as well.
Wow.
Underrated wrestler.
Yeah.
So I with Sensational Sherry.
How long did that go on for?
8 minutes 6.
Oh right. Okay.
I felt like that could have had more.
It could have. That could have had more life. Yeah.
The Natural Disasters.
Yes.
Earthquake and Typhoon.
Nice.
Defeated the Beverly Brothers.
Oh.
Bo Beverly and Blake Beverly with the
wow.
Genius.
For God's sake.
See, everybody remembers SummerSlam 92 as being this amazing
Yes.
event. Then you look at these and you go,
Yeah.
oh, right, okay. Crush
Yes.
defeated the Repo Man.
Oh.
The Repo
The
Man.
Repo Man. Flippin' hell. I mean, if Crush hadn't have won that match, I'd be disappointed in Crush, to be honest.
So this is the one that I think is that fucked them over.
Okay.
Ultimate Warrior Randy Savage.
Yeah.
I think Warrior
Yeah.
would have fucked them out of the money.
Oh, I think so.
I think that's why they would have lost out. I think it would have been a case of,
If
you
the-
want me to go over to the UK and lose to Randy Savage?
Yes.
Yeah, I want my payday.
I think definitely.
I think if they're losing money, that's where it is.
Well, if we think about this logistically, by SummerSlam 92, Warrior would have been on his first run, a downward slide of his first run, and he would have never really got back to where he was, because he would have headlined WrestleMania at the start of a decade, so
Yeah.
he would have considered himself the big man.
Yeah.
By SummerSlam 92, it would have been a little bit different. Obviously, he had that whole comeback, both with the WCW, the ridiculous thing they did around
weird.
96
Yeah.
Halloween Havoc, but then he would have had the comeback where he just came in and owned Triple H
Yeah.
at WrestleMania 12. But even so, he would never do as well as the main event of WrestleMania against Hulk Hogan.
No, he would never be the same.
No.
But from what I understand of the Ultimate Warrior, he had such a high fucking egotistical version of himself.
I changed his name legally to
Changed
Warrior.
his name fucking legally to Warrior, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Held Vince McMahon up at fucking gunpoint for his money.
Yes.
You know, like, at this point, and I don't think it's far off from that happening.
No, it's not far.
So this is like peak crazy.
This is probably why, because Vince probably said to him, I'll tell you what, I'll give you X amount, and then the minute he left the room, he turns around to Briscoe or Patterson and goes, make sure he gets paid Y amount.
Yeah.
Warrior collects his paycheck and goes to visit McMahon and goes, you promised me verbally, and I'll put a gun, in your temple, and you can argue it with the devil or something, and then suddenly McMahon is like, fine, pay the man. And to be honest, though, I also say, in Triple H's credit, I also say that when you look at SummerSlam 92, you're not talking about a million miles away from the fact that the company was really struggling to make money in those days. It wasn't the massive success it is now, and leaving aside the trials involving Hogan and the perjury and Vince McMahon and the steroids, you're also looking at the fact that around 92, 93, the company was coming in to struggle, and by 95, there was a lot of talk of bankruptcy.
Yeah,
there was a lot of serious talk about folding the company up.
I mean, it's. I think this is where I think we've found. And one of the things I didn't cover: visas.
That's
visas,
true.
They would have had to have work visas. Every single person on this card.
Yes.
And ring crew.
Yes.
And production and TV. All of them would have had to get visas.
Can you tell me, was it Animal or Hawk who went to Collision in Korea for the WCW event in 95? Because I know it was one of them was at the event in North Korea, but it wasn't the other. And it's funny, when you mentioned the demons, I kind of thought, I don't think it was Hawk, I think it was Animal.
It was Hawk.
Was it Hawk?
Defeated Tado Yasuda in 2 minutes 21.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was Hawk.
Which is interesting that you would. It's just quite curious that, because I wonder at the time, again, I know that the Road Warriors were a thing in WCW, and it was a very big deal for him not to go over with Hawk, but whether he just, everybody needs a payday, I suppose.
Yeah, everybody's got a price.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's next match after this is SummerSlam 92.
Yes.
Undertaker versus Kamala.
Oh, that's nice.
With Harvey Whippleman and Kim Chi.
Oh, the trainer Harvey Whippleman and the handler Kim Chi.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Tatanka against the Berserker.
Oh, Tatanka. I remember him well.
I remember him well.
He entered the Royal Rumble in the last couple of years as a surprise entrance, didn't he?
Yeah, that's a weird one.
He came in very randomly for about 15 minutes, and he did quite well. And then
Tatanka got into good shape as well. For that sort of shit.
Yeah.
And then obviously our main event, Bulldog Bret Hart.
Of course.
And
which to be fair, Bret Hart would have done, because his sister would have went, my husband is going to become a main event star, would you? And I've heard, actually, that Bulldog was so nervous about that match that Bret had to carry him through it. That Bulldog froze in the ring at the start of that match.
I mean, when you look back at it, you can probably tell that.
Lennox Lewis carrying the flag for him, and he's led out in front of his countrymen.
Like, why wouldn't not be nervous?
No.
That, it's just ridiculous.
I'll tell you one, actually, which you might like to compare to that, right? So you've got that SummerSlam 92 card. Newcastle, Whitley Bay Ice Rink, December 1993.
Right.
There was a house show. If you can find the card for that event, I can tell you right now it will be worth it, because we spoke about this recently on the show, and someone had said that their first ever event was going to that, and they were about 9 or 10 years old. And this particular card blows away SummerSlam 92, bearing in mind that was a major pay-per-view.
Hold on, let me find.
That's all right.
So far, I've only got Take That. Take That, apparently, we're at the Whitley Bay.
Yeah.
Right, let me have a look. Here we go.
Okay.
Got it. WWF European Spring Tour, 1993.
There was a spring tour, but there was also a December tour.
This is that's April 14th.
Yeah, because there was an April one and there was a December one, but the December one, it's particularly because of the main event. But if you look at the card for that event, you'd be really surprised. That's all right.
It's not giving me anything after that. WWF House Shows 1993. So December, they have Birmingham, Cardiff, Bournemouth, Nürnberg, Dusseldorf.
No, nothing for Whitley Bay.
No, it says the only Whitley Bay one I've got is in April.
What was the main event of that one in April?
Mr. Perfect, Lex Luger.
Oh no, because the main event of the December show, and I'd love to find that right info, but the main event of the December '93 show was The Undertaker against Yokozuna.
Oh.
And it was just like they were reading the card list off to us of the matches, and I was just blown away by how phenomenal this house show was, compared, of course, to the idea that SummerSlam had been the year before. And as you say, when looking back retrospectively, it's not a phenomenal card.
I mean, it's just I'm having a look there, and I can't really find anything. Hold on. It might be this one. Hold on. Might be that one. Is anyone going to give me information? Oh, here we go. Found it.
Oh, cool.
All right. On WrestlingData.com.
Excellent.
So, yes, this is the one.
Yes.
Adam Bomb versus Virgil. Adam Bomb.
Nice.
Really? Okay. All right. I see where you went with this. Fucking Cold War and all that shit. Okay. Tatanka against Diesel.
Oh.
And Tatanka beat him by count out.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's the only way Tatanka could beat Diesel. Let's be fair. Yeah.
Smoking Guns against... Hold on. The Red Knight and the Black Knight.
Oh,
God. I don't even know who the fuck those people are.
I really hope that the Smoking Guns won that match.
They did, yes.
Excellent.
1, 2, 3 Kid defeated Rick Martel.
Flippin' heck.
Razor Ramon against Erwin R. Shyster.
Wow.
Randy Savage against Shawn Michaels.
Flippin' heck.
And then Undertaker Yokozuna.
Do you know, in terms of the legendary names that you see at that event, I have to be honest, that's like, retrospectively, I think, and that's the funny thing. I was saying to, you will go to an event at North, and retrospectively, 20 years hence, we will look back on an event at North and go, oh my God, I can't believe I saw Rory Coyle face the Primate.
But I mean, those last 4 matches are pretty fucking good. Well, I mean, Razor Ramon and R. Shyster's probably alright, but 1, 2, 3 Kid Rick Martel would have been solid.
Yeah.
Savage Michaels would have been solid. Undertaker Yokozuna would have been solid. So I can't see any problems there. But yeah, so I didn't expect to do that today, but
there you go.
Always nice to learn different things. But I think we should give it a wrap up because we're coming up to an hour now.
Oh, fair enough.
So
time flies when you're having fun.
Time flies when it's SummerSlam 1992. Amazing.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure.
I'm looking forward to doing the show tonight.
I am so looking forward to it. It should be really good. Well, by the time people will have heard this, they will have hopefully heard ourselves. So that'll be a nice little interesting thing where we'll be like, actually, this was recorded in the past, considering the live show, but it's going to be played in the future.
Yeah.
I don't want to confuse people, but
Back to the Future, timey-wimey,
that's it.
66 miles an hour.
Yeah.
88, sorry. Friggin' Kenny Williams is going to jump on my ass now because I got a Back to the Future reference wrong. Well, Wayne, it's been amazing having you on.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank
Everybody,
you so much.
Listen to Spanish Announce Table on Nova Wednesdays 8 till 10.
Indeed.
And keep on to @Announce Spanish.
Yes,
Twitter.
Announce Spanish on Twitter, and we also put the shows up on a site called Podbean. But if you like and you have your lovely mobile phone, you can also find us if you search for Spanish Announce Table Wrestling on Spotify. You'll find us in there as well.
There you go.
So we can never escape you.
Spanish Announce always in your ear. Okay, thank you very much, Wayne. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Pleasure.